Good morning, class. This morning I'm going to talk about my process for writing and illustrating a children's book. My thesis right now is a children's book, and the story I'm actually going to talk about is a story that I worked on a little while ago, so we can go through the full process because right now my thesis illustrations are not finished. So I'm going to talk about my book Celestina, which is a Latina interpretation of Cinderella. So the first thing I started with when I started working on Celestina was writing it. I already had the concept for this modern take on Cinderella in Manhattan. I knew I wanted the heroine to be Latina. I wanted to make it funny, sort of a play on the stereotype of the Mexican housemaid, and then also play on the white trash raising to power, all that kind of stuff. So anyway, the first thing I did was I researched Cinderella stories and then took out my favorite one and basically adapted it for modern times. And then after I wrote it, went back and edited it several times, and as I'm editing it, I started working on my character drawings and started figuring out the different characters, what they look like, as well as what they sounded like. I figured out different visuals for rooms, what their world looked like. This is sort of an important part of the book. Not necessarily everything is going to go in there, but for me it's important to understand the entire world of the characters and everything in it. So I'm going to show you guys some samples of that right now. Hello, welcome back. After I do the whole beginning process and get the book written, my next step is to create a flow dummy, or, well, basically a flow chart of all the compositions of the book and how they run together. It's a little bit different than thumbnails. It's a lot more basic shapes, basic line, and just making sure that one page flows into another without any sort of jarring or lags. Very similar to film, but the difference is it's a book. So after I do that, then I go to thumbnails. So I take my flow dummy and make sure everything flows together, and then after that I do really simple, basic thumbnails, and again, getting a little bit more specific in my composition, subject matter. Usually when I do the flow dummy, I kind of know what everything is, but I still want to make sure my compositions flow from one to another before I start on my thumbnails. So I'm going to show you that right now. Hello again. The next part, or part of the process that I neglected to talk about from the beginning, was research. This is a really important part of my process. I love doing research. It's one of my favorite parts. Whether right now my thesis book is actually stories based on the life of my dog. So I watch her, observe her, draw her, have tons of pictures of similar dogs to her. In the same respect, I did this for Celestina. Um, I wanted a really high fashion Manhattanite world, so I did a lot of research in fashion magazines. The sisters are based on sort of Britney Spears, Lindsay Lohan types, and Celestina is a very classier version of that. So I always put together a binder, and this is my binder. I'm not going to bother to scan it because it's huge. And as you can see, these are some of my inspirational pictures I always have on the front, and then I just have tons and tons of research of images. Some of them are character research. This is one of those for the sisters. I don't know if you can see that. And then some of it are just sort of images that I liked, colors that I liked. Here's some more sister research. But yeah, so it's all in this binder. And so while here's some color references, some world references. So while I'm actually working on the book, I always have the research around me, especially during the color part of the process. So I know what color palette, make sure everything stays in the same world. It's one of my favorite parts. I love doing research and collecting everything and putting it all together because I think it comes from my theater background. I did a lot when I was a costume designer. And now I've been able to apply that experience to my experience now as an illustrator. So now you've seen my thumbnails, my research book. I've talked about my process for writing. The next step is to hone in and get a lot more specific. Now, normally when I would do a full book, I would do a little tighter version of the thumbnails, and then after the tighter version of the thumbnails, I would go in with tight pencils. For Celestina, I only had to do 6 illustrations, and from what I've been told, once you start sending your books to publishers, it's actually good not to have the whole book done because editors usually want to get their hands in, make changes. So it's actually going to save you time in the long run to not have the entire book done and sent out because the editors might think you're far too attached to your work. So this is actually a pretty good thing that I don't have the whole book finished. But for this particular assignment, I had to do 6. I'm going to show you a couple of them. And what I would do is after I do the thumbnails, I would work on a little bit tighter pencil, get the values all worked out, then from there sort of think about color, and then after I do all that, finally get a tight pencil drawing. And this is where I get all my fun stuff, all my details worked out, the majority of my details anyway, majority of my figures, and have the whole composition done. And I'm going to show you that right now. Hello again. Sorry, I can't help it. So now you've seen pretty much almost the entire process that I have figured out for putting together a children's book, starting with writing the story, down to research, flow dummy, thumbnails, tight pencils, color comps. I don't think I actually have my color comps anymore for Celestina, but I'll show you all the rest of the stuff, or I have showed you the rest of the stuff. And then after that, after all the tight pencils are approved, it's just a matter of transferring my drawing to the watercolor paper and painting it. And this is, of course, my favorite part, is when all the elements come together and you finally have your full illustrations. And I always save some stuff for the very, very last, tiny little details, because that's one of my favorite parts of illustrating is doing tiny little details, giving the viewer little surprises as they look through their piece, almost rewarding them for exploring the piece even more than just flipping through it. I've put little jokes in there and just little things for the kids and for the adults who are reading it as well, because the adults are the ones who are going to buy the book. And I'm going to show you the final illustrations for that. They're actually on my blog, but I'm going to put them in this video. And thank you so much for your time. I'm so glad that I was able to make this video. Thank goodness for Max and eyesight. And yeah, I look forward to seeing everybody else's work.